The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you might be. A big welcome to you all. My name is Sean, and I'm delighted you're joining us for today's ESPC community webinar. Today I am joined by Feline, who will cover all levels of Power Automate, from small personal flows to supporting flows in Power Apps. We love hearing what you guys have to say, so remember to join in on the conversation about today's webinar and more on X. Our handle is @ESPC_community, and our hashtag is #ESPC24. Tweet us, tag us, and tell us what you've learned. Don't forget to check out our Learning Hub, which is updated daily with the latest blogs, ebooks, webinars, and how-to videos. You can access and view the Learning Hub by visiting our website, sharepointeurope.com, and clicking the Content tab at the top. Don't let the learning stop here. Continue to keep up and stay ahead by joining us for our next webinar, introducing Power BI in one slide, 1 hour, and one demo with Ben Howard. This webinar is part of Microsoft Power Platform Week and takes place tomorrow, Thursday, 28 March 2024, 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. CET. For more information on this webinar, please check out sharepoint.com/Microsoft Power Platform Week. Attention to all individuals considering attending the European Power Platform Conference. Our exclusive super early bird promotion will conclude today, Wednesday at midnight, March 27th. From Thursday, tomorrow, March 28th onwards, ticket prices will be subject to an increase. Seize the final chance to capitalize on its current offer. Seize your spot today by visiting www.sharepointeurope.com/European Power Platform Conference pricing. Stay ahead in the ever-evolving world of Microsoft 365 with ESPC24. Gain invaluable insights, network with peers, and supercharge your career. Don't miss out on the super early bird sale. Book your tickets now, www.sharepointeurope.com/pricing. After the webinar, we'll have a questions and answers session. Type any questions you might have into the questions window. Questions will be selected and answered at the end of the presentation. This webinar will be recorded and added to the Resource Center, where you'll be notified by email when it is available. And now, I'm going to pass you over to today's webinar presenter, Feline. Hello, Feline. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, thanks for having me. Okay, so let's get started. Let me share my slides. So today in this webinar, we're going to talk about all levels of Power Automate. So we're going to talk about small personal flows, personal productivity flows with some demos, and we're going to talk about a little bit more complex flows like supporting flows in Power Apps. Like I mentioned, there will be a lot of demos to guide you to what kind of flows you have. I'm not going to go into detail about the guidelines about Power Automate, but I want to give you some inspiration and some idea of what's possible within Power Automate. So I hope you like it. But before we get started, let me introduce myself. I'm Feline Perrin. I'm currently working as a Power Platform lead at Capgemini. I recently switched. And if you want to reach out, that's my LinkedIn. So please reach out, send me a message, let me know what you think about this webinar, or if you have any questions, let me know. So who am I? I'm Microsoft certified. I actually started my Microsoft journey within SharePoint. So you will see a lot of SharePoint examples in this presentation as well. But then I quickly changed to the Power Platform. I immediately fell in love with Power Apps and Power Automate because I really love that you can create wonderful applications in such a short time and really help the clients with that. So I'm truly a Power addict, and I also believe in Azure DevOps. I'm also an Azure Dev or a DevOps enthusiast because I think that DevOps is important even if we're talking about low-code solutions like the Power Platform. If we want to make mature and reliable applications, then DevOps is the way to go. So that's truly what I believe. Now, enough about me. Let's get started. So I have for you 5 different levels of Power Automate, all with a demo and some information, some tips and tricks on how to get started with these levels. So let's start at the first level. Let's start at our personal level and let's talk about personal productivity flows. So who are these personal productivity flows for? Well, most likely they will only be used by yourself. They're only for you. They're not there to share with other team members. Well, maybe if that team member likes your flow, they will ask you to share that flow, but the main focus of the flow is for you. It's about your own automation. So the automation will be on your personal information. It will only affect your own data. It will only cover, for example, your own Outlook mailbox. We're not going to create flows for shared mailboxes in this level, but only focus on personal automations. So most likely, these flows will be on the default environment and no ALM is needed for these kind of flows. So simple flows that are there to make your day-to-day life easier. Now, some tips and tricks to keep in mind. It might be a good idea to comment your expressions. I know these kind of flows are not really meant to share with others, so it's not that somebody else is going to look at your flow or has to understand your flow, but you yourself have to understand your flow. If you come back to that personal productivity flow in 1 year or even after a few months, are you still sure what you did and why you did these things? So make sure that you comment things like, for example, expressions that you used. Make sure that you have some documentation on why you did certain things, why expressions are the way they are, and why you did certain steps inside your flow. Choose logical names. Once again, it's for your own good. Make sure that you still understand what your flow is doing, what kind of actions are inside your flow, and why these actions are there. And then, of course, you can use Power Automate templates. There are lots and lots of templates from Power Automate that you can start using right now, and they will help you on how to get started, how to connect with certain connectors, what kind of automations are possible. It's all inside that templates library, so I will show you that as well. Now, some examples about personal productivity flows. Well, these can be mailbox automations, for example. It might be that you have a certain client and that client sends attachments and you want those attachments in a specific folder, then that's a personal productivity flow. That's a flow that will make your life easier to get those attachments and put them right on the place where they belong. Out of office flows, to set an automatic out of office reply or to set out of office leave events, like the example that I will show you right away. And then lastly, some Excel automations. So these are really things that will make your life easier. It's really for you, or the repetitive tasks that you do day to day where you think, this might need an automation. So let's close the presentation for now and look at our first flow. Well, first look at all the templates that are available at Power Automate. So if you go to Power Automate, the shortcut is make.powerautomate.com. Then you have an option here with templates, and this is a list of templates, and as you can see, it goes on and on and on and on. So there are already a lot of templates. You can select more templates to get started. So for your personal productivity flows, search for a template to get started if you want to get started right away. Okay, on to the demo that I want to show you. Well, it might be that you have leave requests and you want to go on holidays and you have to request your leave. This most likely will be put into a system, and that system is going to send you whether your leave was approved or rejected. And then you can get emails looking like this, saying, okay, your request has been approved, and your leave will start 1st of April in this case and end the 5th of April. Okay, perfect. Normally I would manually go to my calendar and set an event that I'm on holidays or that I'm on leave for that period, but I want to automate that. So I created this flow. What is this flow going to do? Well, it's going to look for that email and then it's going to automatically create a leave event in my calendar. So let's have a deeper look. The trigger, of course, is when a new email arrives. So this is on my inbox, my personal inbox. It's not a shared inbox, it's on my inbox. And the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to filter on a subject. In this case, it will be leave request approved. Why? Because I know that that's how the system is going to respond, or that will be the mail that the system is going to deliver to me. Okay, so that's step number 1. So it's only going to look for emails with that subject. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the body and I'm going to convert the HTML to text. Why? Because otherwise I will get this HTML text and I don't like it. So to make my life easier, I'm going to convert the body to text, and that's what I'm doing in this step, so I can just work with the text itself. Then I'm going to get the start date and the end date because I want to make the event, of course, start at a proper date and end at a proper date. So for this, I use a compose just because I want to keep it simple with the personal productivity flows. And what I'm going to do here is I wrote an expression to get my start date from this body. So if we look back at this email, then we see that this email has a fixed structure. There will be start and then the start date, and then afterwards end and the end date. So what I can do is I can look inside the text that I converted here, the body that I converted, and I can start looking for start, because I know that's that after that I will get my start date. Okay, so now I have start, and then I want the date. So I don't want it to go to end, so I'm also going to split on where end starts. So that's basically how you have to read this expression from inside to outside. So what I'm doing is I'm going to take the output of the previous step, which is a conversion to text. I'm going to split that text, and on what I'm going to split it, well, where I find a start and then a space. Then I'm going to take the last part, meaning that I will take everything that's after that start and then space. Then I'm going to split that text again. Now I'm going to search for end with a space, and then I'm going to take the first part because it will be everything that's before start and end. So that's basically what this expression is doing. It's to make it easy, it's just saying, okay, everything that's between start and end, that's the text that I want. For the end date, I'm going to do the same thing. So that's also the expression that I used here. It's in the notes to remind myself, okay, that this is the expression that's inside of this. And here I'm going to once again take the text, and this time I'm going to first look for end. So I'm going to first look for this part, and then I see that I have this next line, and that my date will go from here to there, and then I have this next line. So what I'm doing is I'm first splitting on where I find end. I'm going to take the last part again, and then I'm splitting on, this is a way to find that the next line. So this is what you can do, and then I'm splitting on this, so that's the next line, and I'm taking the first. So what I'm taking is basically everything between this end space and then this next line. Okay, now I have these dates, so I can create my event. and I'm going to create the event in my calendar. I'm going to give it the subject leave because I'm going to be on leave, and then I will give it a proper start time and end time, which is in this case the compose, but I'm going to format it in the proper date time. Since I'm from Belgium, it's going to be days, months, and then years. So that's the date time that I'm going for. For the end date, you see that there's an expression here as well to add hours. Why? Because, let me go to my calendar. So you see that the leave event is here. It will start on April at midnight, and it will actually take, if I'm not adding these hours, the 5th of April, but also at midnight. So in my calendar, it would appear that I'm only away from Monday until Thursday. I don't want that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some hours, in this case 17 hours, so that it's 5 p.m. and my leave event ends at 5 p.m. So that's what I'm doing here. You can also take 6 p.m. It's whatever you want. And then I'm going to say, okay, this is the time zone that I'm in. So more advanced options. I'm also going to make sure that it's visible as out of office so that people see that I'm out of office indeed. What you can do is you can add here a step as well to already create an automatic reply for that same leave event as well, or you can create another personal productivity flow to search for all the leave events inside your calendar and then create an automatic reply on these leave events. But so this is an example of such a personal productivity flow. It's completely about my Outlook, Outbooks or inbox. So it's only affecting my own data and it's going to help me. It's not really for others. So I'm not really going to share it with others. It's really there to help me. So I don't forget to add a leave to my calendar. Okay. So that was level 1. Now on to level 2, SharePoint automations. So like I mentioned, I come from the SharePoint side. So of course, there's some SharePoint automations in this presentation as well. The SharePoint automations, this is where it's most likely will be for a small team, maybe some business people that take care of a certain SharePoint document library or certain SharePoint site, whatever that you want to use SharePoint for inside your organization. And the main idea is to do some automation on the SharePoint data. It's not really there to do some real level critical processes inside your automation, inside your organization. It's really there for the SharePoint data and to make sure that you can do more with the SharePoint data. So it's an automation really on top of SharePoint. Now, SharePoint already gives you some suggestions, so you can start creating Power Automate flows from SharePoint, and that's why that's level 2, because you don't really have to start from zero. You can already work with the suggestions from SharePoint. And something that I want to give here as well, or tell you as well, is that you don't have to recreate things that are in SharePoint already, like the alert me. It's something that you already have built in SharePoint, so there's no real use into creating a separate Power Automate flow for that. Okay, so some examples. The example that I'm going to show you is the retention date flow. So let's go back to my flows. So this is a SharePoint site with a document library, documents. I have a couple of documents, and as you can see, these documents, they have a start date and an end date, so they're only valid between these two dates, between the start date and the end date. And all these documents also have a responsible. So the person that's responsible for that document, and that's also the person that needs to be notified when the document is going to expire. So just to show you the alert me. So if you want some alerts when items are changed, then you can do that with Alert Me. There's no need to create separate Power Automate flows for that. So I just want to show you that you already have quite a lot of options with that Alert Me option. And as mentioned, you can create Power Automate flows directly from SharePoint. So with this Automate option, you already have some choices that SharePoint gives you, like the request sign off or set a reminder. This can be for the start date and the end date, so it already sees, okay, these are dates, so reminders can be set on these dates. For example, if I want a reminder for the end date, then I can just select that one. Then it's going to give me this panel from Power Automate. It's going to ask me for the proper connections, and then it's already going to give me a template of a flow that I can use. So here is checking for my connections, and then I can just continue, and it's going to create a flow for me, and I can just make the adjustments that I want, that I need. I already prepared a flow. Good, just, oh, here it is. So this is a, oh, let's go to get it again, no worries. So this will be a flow to notify me when my document is going to be expire in, for example, 2 months. So flow wants to load. So it's going to send me a notification by email because I just like that. And what it's going to do, this is a scheduled flow. So the previous flow was an automated flow. It was run, or it was triggered automatically when that certain email got in my mailbox. Now it's a scheduled flow, so it's going to run in this case, every day. But you can change that frequency and that interval yourself if you want to. You can also say, okay, at what hours this flow needs to run. So that's all possible with a scheduled flow. But here I'm just going to check every day. That's fine. Then I want a notification only when the document is going to expire in 2 months. So I'm going to use this step, the add to time step. And I'm going to add 2 months to that date that I'm currently on. Then I'm going to filter all the documents. So here I'm connecting to that SharePoint site that I just showed and the documents library, and I have added a filter query to see, okay, if that end date is greater than the date of the current date plus 2 months, and a lesser than the next date. Why is this? Because sometimes it's going to take the time into account as well, and to avoid that, I'm going to just check between the dates that no matter the time that there's connected to that end date, that I will always get the right date. So that's what's going on here. Again, I have my notes and I have proper namings for my steps so that I know what's going on inside these steps, as I can look at my expression, what the filter expression is, or the filter query is that I added here for later on. Then I have a condition to check if there are some documents that fall in this filter query, so that can be filtered. So I'm just going to check if it's empty, yes or no. If it's empty, that means that nothing needs to happen. And if it's not empty, that means that I need to do something. I know that you can do this with expressions as well on your steps and so on, but just since we're only
Hi, Feline. I just can't hear you for a sec there. I think you might be on mute or.
Am I?
Yeah, I can
Can you
hear
hear
you.
me?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, perfect. Okay, perfect. Okay, so if I have some documents, then I'm going to, for all these documents that are going to expire in 2 months, I will send an email to the responsible. So that responsible person, I'm going to get that email from that responsible person, and I will just send a notification that the document will expire. So, and then I will just get an email if the document expires. So that's what this flow is doing. As you can see, it was once again a very simple flow, not that many steps, not that complex. Okay, we had some expressions, but we added them as notes so that we can later on look at it and see, okay, what did we do? But now let's continue with the next level. The next level is process supporting flows. So this is really where you're going to automate certain processes inside your company. So usually this will have a bigger impact, and these flows will be used by a bigger team, but most likely they will not be critical. They will not be enterprise critical in that sense that you can just continue your work. It's just the supporting processes, like, for example, your IT processes, HR processes, and so on. You will automate them with Power Automate. So that's what these process supporting flows are about. If you have IT processes, like, for example, creating new accounts for people that are going to start at your company, all these kind of things, or adding people to certain groups. These can also be the kind of automations that you're looking at. For HR, the same. If you have travel requests, leave requests, expense requests, and so on, then these are the perfect processes that you can look into to automate with Power Automate. These can be standalone in that sense that it's just a flow that's going to run, either scheduled, automated, or you initiated it yourself, or it can already be coupled with a Power App. For example, your onboarding automations, it can be that you have an onboarding app where you have the checklist of everything that needs to happen, and you want to keep track of the status of that onboarding inside your app. And from your app, you're going to start up certain flows that are going to do certain things like send out the employee agreement, for example, capture information about mobile subscriptions, for example, send out welcome emails for that starter, and so on. Most likely these flows will be created by citizen developers or low-code developers. So this is a little bit deeper inside the Power Platform and deeper inside the possibilities of Power Automate. Some tips and tricks. If you have some sub-actions within your flow, then it's always a good idea to use scope to make it more readable and clear about what's happening inside your flow. Certainly if it's a big process that's running with multiple steps, scopes might help with readability. Same goes for variables. If you use something multiple times throughout your flow, or you set certain variables throughout your flow, then use the variables as well. It also will make it more readable. And here in this case, most likely you're going to use much more connectors. The personal productivity flow is more related to Outlook, Excel, and so on. Then we had the SharePoint automations, which is of course related to SharePoint. But here in this case, you can use many more connectors. You can even integrate RPA and AI Builder, for example, on these onboarding flows. If you want to read out the ID cards of somebody, or if you're going to send out a form and you want to automatically look at the form and fill the information from the form inside another system that you have, then you can look into AI Builder. If you're still using legacy applications, for example, to request a mobile subscription, then you can use RPA with Power Automate Desktop. So in this case, it will become more complex. You will have more steps, more connectors that you're going to use. So it's important that you start thinking about error handling, that you at least take into account that not every step will be successful and that sometimes it might fail, skip, or time out, and then you need to capture that in some sort of way. Okay, some examples. Approvals. Approvals are a very typical example of these process supporting flows. Or onboarding automation, like I said, it might be that you need to onboard somebody, and then you have most likely a list of all kind of things that need to happen, that normally manually need to be done, but that you can now automate inside an application with Power Automate flows doing all the automation for you. Okay, so let's have a look at an example. So this is an example of an approval. It's in this case a two-step approval. In this case, it's coming from Power Apps, but it can be a standalone application itself. So it might be that inside an expense request application or leave request application, you're going to start a request and it needs an approval at a certain point. So most likely we'll also have some information from that application that you want to push to Power Automate and you want to use within Power Automate. So that's what you do here. I'm going to use some variables like a unique ID. Then I'm going to later on use to do some insertion in a database of my choice. And I'm going to keep track of the success of that insertion. For example, with a Boolean being true or false, whether it's successful or not. I'm going to parse out that JSON that I got from Power Apps. Why? Because it's easier, because I then can work with all the properties inside the JSON itself. In this flow, I added a CSV table. Why? Because I want to give an overview of the request and all the items inside the request in the approval mail that I'm going to send. So to build up this HTML mail, I need these pipe characters, and it just a little bit more visual in this way if I use this create CSV table. And then I have my approval. In this case, it's a custom response approval because it's a two-step approval. The person can either approve or delegate it to the next step. And then here in the details, I have a join where I'm going to use that CSV table to build up a table in HTML. Okay, then I have my condition. And if that person approves, I'm going to do some things. The first thing is here the use of a scope. And in that scope, I'm going to get the latest ID. Why? Because I need that ID to make a new request, new item later on in this flow. So it's a kind of a subflow with a few steps. So that's why I use a scope in this case. And what am I going to do? Well, I'm going to get all the items. I can sort this on the ID. Then I'm going to use the select because it will give me a lot of information, that first get items call. So I just want to clean up that data, get the information that I want, that I'm interested in. So that's why this select is very helpful to make it more structured and get the data that I need. And then I'm going to set the latest ID. So I'm going to take the highest ID that I found, and I'm going to add, make it an integer of that because it might be a string depending on the database that you're using and how you set it up. So I'm going to make it an integer out of that, and then I'm going to add 1. because I want the next available ID. Then I have a do until loop, and what's happening in this do until loop? Well, it's going to perform some actions until the success code is true, so until something is succeeded. And what is it going to do? Well, it's going to create an item, it's going to add an extra row. In this case, it's SharePoint, but it might be SQL. It might be that we're inserting rows in SQL here with that ID that we got from that addition here. So the latest ID +1. I'm going to then create that item with that ID. If everything went fine and everything went successfully, then I'm going to set that success code to true, meaning that it's no longer going to go in this do until loop because it was successful. And if not, then I'm going to increment the variable. So I'm going to take the next available ID. I'm going to add 1 to that ID and try again with that new ID. So I'm also going to set the success code to false, meaning that it will go back in this loop. So as you can see here, we have an option where if it's successful, it will go to this branch, and if it failed, it will go to the other branch. How do you set this up? Well, this with the configure run after, you can say that a certain action needs to run when it's failed, it's skipped, or it's timed out. So that's how you can capture if actions fail. And then, of course, add the appropriate steps to notify people or to take the appropriate actions. Like in this case, we're just going to try with a new ID until it works. And then if that was successful, then I will also inform the requester that the approval has been, a request has been approved. If that first person delegated the approval, then I will go in this no branch and I basically will start a second approval, the second line approval, which will look kind of the same, but now I'm just going to use the standard approve and reject. So this approval can only be approved or rejected, and I'm always going to inform the requester whether the request was approved or rejected. So I'm always going to send an email. So make sure that you always have something to give back. This time it's to the requester, but it can also be to the owner to state if the flow was successful or not, and give further information if the flow was not successful, so that they can look into it. Okay, so this was already a little bit more complex. Now on to level 4, the Power App flows. So these flows will be created most likely by your low-code development team because they will be part of an application, for example. Because it can be that there are some functions that you want to perform from an app. It can be a Canvas app, for example, that are not natively supported or that Power Apps just cannot perform. For these kind of things, you want to look at Power Automate. So you can start a Power Automate flow from Power Apps, do the function that's not possible within Power Apps, get a response back, and then work with that response further in your application. Another option that that you can use is you can use Power Automate flows to elevate permissions for users. For example, if you have an application where documents can be moved by certain people, but actually they cannot, the users cannot move it because they, for example, don't have the delete option, or they are not allowed to delete anything, then you can run a Power Automate flow and make sure that it always uses the connection of a service account with elevated permissions, and then that move can be performed by that service account. So that's also an option or a possibility where you want to look into Power Automate. Now, for these kind of flows, it's important that you're going to do error handling, both in the flow, as we saw previously, but also inside the application. So if your flow errors or gives an error, you're going to respond to the application, but you also want to capture that error in your application as well, to make sure that you don't get that red bar on top of your app saying Power Apps Flow, the name of your Power Apps Flow.run gave an error and your user doesn't really know what's happening. So capture that error inside the application as well. Now it might be that you want to make more complex integrations in this case, and you're going to use HTTP calls. Well, then it's a good idea, for example, to create a custom connector for these HTTP calls. So that, yeah, you have a connector there and you don't have to put everything inside of HTTP calls. And of course, if you're developing applications that follow an application lifecycle management, and where you have dev applications, or you create applications or dev, you push them to test, you push them to production and so on. It will go for your Power Automate as well. So you're going to have to use environment variables both inside your application and inside your Power Automate flows as well. And also use a proper connection references to make sure that when you push your flows and your app to other environments, that it will connect, for example, to the proper databases on those environments. For example, SharePoint sites, that it connects to the SharePoint sites of your test environment or your production environment. So that's really important, and it's important when considering these kind of flows for Power Apps. So some examples of functionality: PDF creation, for example, and the thing I want to show you is SharePoint search. Okay, so let's go back to the flow. So, of course, if you have just one SharePoint site, one document library inside your Power App, and you just want to search over that specific site or that specific document library, then there's no problem. You can use a search filter and it's possible inside of Power Apps. But from the moment that you have to dynamically sort of get documents from anywhere inside SharePoint, from all kind of sites, you're not going to add these sites separately inside your Power App. So you need another mechanism. We, for example, had an example where there were more than 1,000 SharePoint sites containing possible information. So we needed to search across all these sites. We're not going to do that by getting the SharePoint sites directly into Power Apps. So we needed something else. Of course, SharePoint has a great search option, so you can use that, but you cannot natively use that inside of Power Apps. So for this, we created a Power Automate flow, which is this is kind of like a simplified version of what we did, but I'm going to show you in detail. So most likely, if it starts from an app, then you're going to have some inputs from that app. You're going to have some parameters from your app that you want to use inside Power Automate. So in this case, it will be the search query. And then we're going to use an HTTP request. Remember that it might have been better to create a custom connector for this. But for now, I'm just going to use HTTP request to SharePoint. And here I'm going to make the request to search and add the search query or build up the search query that I want to use. So the query text is the information that I got from Power Apps. And then I'm going to add some properties that I want to select and some extra information. So this is the search query. You have some tools out there to help you with these search queries if you want to. Okay, so it's going to perform the search query. And then I'm going to check if I get some results back, yes or no. So that's what I'm going to check here inside the response that I get. There's a relevant results, and if the row count is bigger than 0, that means that there are some results from that search query. If I have some results, I'm once again going going to use the select to select the properties that I want, most likely the properties that I added to the search query as well. These are just some examples, and what I'm doing here is I'm going to check if there's a value yes or no, and then I'm going to add it to select. The success code will be success, and then I'm also going to put that result or respond that result back to Power Apps so I can further use it in Power Apps. With this setup, you're going to have to parse out the JSON in Power Apps yourself, but you can do that with parse JSON there. So that's the successful one. If I don't have any results, I'm going to use the success code empty because nothing was there, but I'm going to respond it back to the Power App so that the Power App can act accordingly and give the proper notification to the user. Of course, it might be that the search query and that HTTP call does not work at all. So then I'm also going to respond back to Power Apps, but this time with the success code failed, to let the application know that it failed and it needs to take the proper actions. So once again, and with that run after configuration, I can say, okay, if it failed, it skipped, or it timed out, I always want to respond something back to Power Apps because the request was made from Power Apps, so I have to always catch what happened in Power Apps as well. So that's the biggest takeaway that I want to give here with Power App flows. Always respond in any kind of situation back to Power Apps to make sure that you can handle what happened inside your Power Automate, because otherwise, if you don't know, your user going to get errors that they don't understand, or you're going to have some behavior where you don't have the proper response to. So that's the most important thing to remember here. Okay, and then we're on to our last level, the more complex flows. More complex flows, what do I understand about or under these more complex flows? They are bigger flows. So flows with multiple functions, multiple different functions that might not have anything to do with each other. I would say, okay, use child flows. Make sure that you create small flows that you can maintain. So don't create flows with more than 100 steps inside of them, because it will be impossible to maintain that, to understand what's happening inside that flow. So for those kind of scenarios, use child flows. Split up your flow into multiple flows so that you can maintain small and easy flows. And for this to work, you're going to have to create your flows from a solution. So your flows need to be solution aware, and those run only users, well, you cannot give user information to the child flow, so you're always going to have to run it from a specific connection. I'm going to show you that in the demo. So some examples: permissions, to set some permissions. If you share something with somebody, they might also need to have access to an application or needs to be added to certain groups or whatever. So just actually anything that has a lot of steps, those are complex flows, and those are perfect to split up into child flows. Okay, so like I said, they need to be created from a solution. That's very, very important. So they need to be solution aware. And then you're going to create two kinds of flows. You first have to start with your child flow, because from your parent flow, you will have to state which child flow that you want to run. And your child flow always needs to start with a manual trigger. So they always need to start with a manual trigger. Then you're going to do your action. In this case, I made a simple example, but it's just to show you the concept of child flows. So we're just going to add somebody that I shared something with to the appropriate group. And then I'm going to have to use that response to Power App or Flow again, because it does not only respond to Power Apps, but it also responds to Flow, and meaning that it will respond to the parent flow about what happened. So you can give back information from the child flow to the parent flow with this step. In this case, I also want to point out, always respond what happened with the flow. So was it successful? Did it fail? Maybe give some more information, some error message about what happened, so that you can always recover from it and know exactly what happened with the child flow. So that's the child flow. So always the manual trigger, then do the kind of actions that you want, and always respond back to your flow, and always include whether it was successful or failed. Important for this child flow as well is the user's configuration, because otherwise it will not work. So this needs to be set on a specific or a fixed connection. It cannot be provided by the run only user, because that doesn't work for child flows. So that's also important to keep this in mind. Then the parent flow can be whatever, so to say. So in this case, I also used a flow that's triggered from Power Apps. So in this case, it's triggered from selecting, for example, an item in the gallery with a certain ID, and providing a person where I'm going to share something with. So then I can perform some actions in this parent flow as well, like, for example, granting access to a certain document to that person that was included here. And then I'm going to run the child flow, which is in this case the flow that I previously showed. But so here you have all the options of the flows that that you can trigger from this step. So that's the concept of a child flow. So you have a parent flow, you have a child flow, and this is really perfect for more complex and bigger flows. Okay, so we're close to the end. So I'm going to make my conclusion. If there are 3 things that you need to remember from all the levels of Power Automate, then it are these 3 tips that I want to give you. Use comments or notes, and naming. Make sure that you name your steps so that you know what's happening inside the step, why the step is there. And maybe you saw that I always maintain the standard name or the default name from the step, then use and then add afterwards what the specific use in that flow is, just to keep track of, okay, what kind of step did I use and why is that step, that specific step in this flow. And then add notes, for example, for expressions. Error handling, don't assume that everything will be successful. So make sure that you also have some steps that run after another step has failed, skipped, or timed out. And make sure that you capture these errors as well, also if you are working from Power Apps. And then build solution aware flows. This is most likely if you want to use the child flow option, which is very helpful if you have big and complex flows. Then, of course, they need to be created from a solution, but also from an ALM perspective, solutions are the way to go. So that's why I also have it here. Start creating flows from a solution. That's the best way. Okay, and with that, I hope that you are inspired, that you have some inspiration about flows that you can start creating yourself, either for personal use or connecting to a Power App, and that you have some tips and tricks to take into account. So yeah, I think we have still some time for some questions. I also want to tell you that there are lots of resources out there for more in-depth Power Automate information, and of course on the European Power Platform Conference itself there will be a lot of in-depth sessions about Power Automate if you want to learn more. So with that, are there any questions?
Thank you, Feline, for a great presentation and demos. So now we'll get into the questions and answers part. Should you wish to ask a question, Please feel free to type in the question window. Now, our first question today is, regarding commenting our expressions, do you mean comments or notes?
Notes. Yeah, I mean notes. Yeah, because comments are there for collaboration. So I mean notes. Add them as notes.
Perfect. So just the second one is, what best practices would you recommend to handle errors?
Yeah, the main concept for errors is, of course, that concept of try catch. So that you try something and you always catch that error then later. What I always suggest is also to notify the owner or the people that are involved creating the application, because if it fails a lot, it will by default also notify the owner, but that might not be the one who needs to be informed. If you create, for example, if you do your development from a service account. So what I also do is notify by email or whatever, or put it in a logging file, but just make sure that you have a reference of, okay, this flow failed, and then also add a message why the flow failed.
Perfect. So regarding branch after failure of the create item in SharePoint, if you are interested in specific error code, you might also use switch.
Yeah, you can use switches if you have an error message goes and you want to do specific things based on that, then you can use switches. Yeah.
Perfect. So next one is, how do we modify body of the standard approval action? For example, to add hyperlinks, text formatting, etc.
Yeah, so it's HTML. So there are a lot of resources out there, like example that's the piped character. Let me see if I can show you. So this is, for example, how to put on or to create a table inside that body of the approval, and you have lots of information out there on the internet as well for specific markdowns. So I would say look at the markdowns for the specific things that you need. This is just an example of how you, for example, can add tables inside that body of the approval.
Perfect. And the next question is, how do you use environment variables with connectors that do not accept custom value? Example, Fin and apps, Dynamics 365.
Yeah, so I use environment variables mostly for SharePoint. So if I have a SharePoint connection and a SharePoint site, I will use an environment variable. I have some of the dynamic content open here. They will be here inside the environment variables. For the Dynamics applications, I don't have experience with that. So I would check online also what the possibilities there. But from my experience with most things like SharePoint and Dataverse and so on, environment variables work great and they work as they should.
Okay. And the next question is, can you show a demo of SharePoint search flow?
Yes, so the search flow, what it's basically just going to do is it's going to give me some text back, and that's why I use this select. It's going to give me a response back. I don't think I have one right now, but just send me a private message and I will make sure that I can give you a proper example of that response.
Lovely. So the next question is, within a child flow, is it better to use branch and two different respond to a Power App or flow? Or better would it be to use a variable, example, success code?
You can use a variable as well. Yeah, I just chose to branch out. Where is it? Because yeah, I can just say, okay, if this step was successful, then push this. If it was failed, push that. But you can also put a variable here and then just respond once with that variable.
Perfect. The next question, so within a parent flow, will the child flow run if the grant access to an item or folder fail?
So in this case, it's just sequential. So it's just going to first run the sequence access, and then it's going to run the child flow if it's succeeded.
Perfect. So the next question is, if importing data into a SharePoint list and setting permissions for a certain SharePoint group based on one of the field values when the item is created, how can you help prevent any issues such as your flow has used more than 80% of its Power Platform request limit in the past 24 hours? Break the flow down into multiple flows.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah. So if importing data into a SharePoint list and setting permissions for a certain SharePoint group based on one of the field values when the item is created, how can you help prevent any issues such as your flow has used more than 80% of its Power Platform requests limit in the past 24 hours? Break the flow down into multiple flows.
Yes, so that request limit, that's something that you need to look into performance to make sure that you don't go over those limits. So really check your flow if you can change it somehow to make it more performant, for example. And to, if it's really big and complex, to also split it up if needed. If you want specific help with that flow, then you can send me a private message because it might be easier to look at that specific flow and then look together. But I would say, yeah, performance-wise, if that request limit is really worrying you, then you really need to look at performance, making sure that you can lower the amount of actions that you're using in your flow. So all these kind of things.
Perfect. So we just have 3 questions left, if that's all right.
Okay.
So the next question is, what happens if I make typing mistakes when I put code in a GUI box? It seems like this syntax is hard and easy to mess up. If there is any syntax checker or auto-co.
Yeah, Power Automate is not always that easy to use there. So for expressions, for example, I use composes because it's easier for me, or put it in Visual Code, for example, and check there what the expression is.
Perfect. So do you create flows in Solution?
Yeah. All these flows that I showed you are created inside Solutions, and that's also what I would recommend.
And the last one, regarding informing whoever, is it better to send email, post message to Teams, or store information in Dataverse?
Yeah, that depends a bit. It's at the standard consultancy answer. It depends. It's something that you have to discuss with the client what they want, because sometimes they might want you not to use email because they already have a lot of email, and then you can put it indeed in Teams, in a certain team or in a channel, and notify people there. It really depends on what the client wants. We had examples where they wanted mails, where they wanted Teams, where they wanted to store it anywhere else. So it depends.
Perfect. So lastly, just someone's looking to contact you privately. So what would be the best way of doing that?
You can always send me a message through LinkedIn. So this is my LinkedIn. So just contact me on LinkedIn.
Perfect. So on behalf of the ESPC community, we'd like to extend a big thank you to you again, Feline, for taking the time today to carry out this webinar. We really appreciate it. So that's the
Thank
end
you
of
for
today's,
having me.
yeah, no worries. So that's the end of today's webinar. You can find this webinar and more at sharepointeurope.com/resource center. Thanks again for all joining us today. Hope you take care soon.
Right.
Bye, everyone.